Michaela Stirling and Francesca Bridgerton. Let's talk. The queer community at large thinks it's great. Meanwhile, the straight female audience created a petition to remove the only black lesbian character in all of mainstream TV. The interaction between Michaela Stirling and Francesca Bridgerton at the end of season 3 received so much backlash on TikTok. Now, if you're unaware of this drama or if you haven't read the books, basically the showrunners of Bridgerton decided to gender swap the character of Michael Stirling from the original Bridgerton books into Michaela Stirling for the show. So a lot of the fans of the Bridgerton books are quite upset because they feel robbed of the original character. They're saying, why did we have to have this change? Was it needed? Is it too woke? In fact, many of the book fans hate it so much to the point that they've created a petition to change the character of Michaela Stirling back to who it was originally supposed to be. And as of today, that petition has reached over 38,000 signatures. Now, off the top of my head, I can probably list about 50 petitions that are way more worth your time than a petition promoting the removal of a fictional character from a TV show. These are first worldly issues if I've ever heard of one. But anyway, in today's video, I'm going to be looking at some of the popular complaints that book fans have had and offer my take on them. Ultimately, it's my opinion that the reason why Michaela was so rejected as a character was because the predominantly straight female audience of Bridgerton is uncomfortable with seeing a woman as a romantic love interest, especially a black woman, especially for an unseeming queer character like Francesca Bridgerton, who is very stereotypically feminine. It's something that straight audiences haven't seen before. I hope that it also becomes clear in this video the significance and the relevance of intersectionality, how the categories of race, gender and sexuality all come together to create a character that traditional heteronormative white audiences are unfamiliar with and potentially uncomfortable with. In terms of responses to the show, whether it's season 2 up until season 3, it's quite clear that audiences have consistently been either uncomfortable or unhappy with seeing people of colour casted as love interests for the main white Bridgerton family. That isn't something that I'm going to go into detail too much in this video, but for example, the backlash that Simone Ashley received in season 2, a lot of people weren't happy with Kate being casted as an Indian woman. The response to seeing an Indian woman cast as the love interest for season 2, for example, was received way less well than Simon was received in season 1. And it's interesting to me how book inaccuracies, changes in race, people of colour as love interests for white characters, that's basically overlooked as long as it's a stereotypically attractive mixed race light-skinned man. Now, as well as debunking these complaints that people have about the gender swap from Michael to Michaela, I also wanted to root this discussion in what I believe to be a wider issue of the romanticization of men in the romance genre. Female audiences, straight female audiences, only want to see relationships where there is a male love interest. And this whole thing as having men as the objects of desire, men as the love interests, it's applicable even when it comes to queer representation. Men loving men relationships, men loving men's storylines are way more popular and seemingly a lot more marketable than women loving women relationships. And this was the very first reaction and idea I had when I saw people's infuriation towards Michaela. Nobody had anything to say about Benedict, who was doing literally the most scandalous thing he could be doing, but people had the world to say about Michaela and Francesca, who have said hi to each other. It's a crush at this point. They've just met. And this is a debate I'll pick up on later on in the video. Now, I want to clarify here that my ideas in this video are merely suggestions. You don't have to take them up. They're merely my opinions. And a lot of you will actually watch this video and disagree with potentially some or all of what I say. And if that's the case, then let me know. It would be interesting to see what other people think about it as well. A lot of the opinions that I share in this video, a lot of them are to do with philosophical issues, representation, intersectionality of race, gender, and sexuality, to which Michaela Stirling, as a black queer woman, ultimately suffers the most. Okay, so moving on to the first part of the video, I'm going to be debunking some of the general complaints, some of the popular complaints that I've been seeing on TikTok videos, people commenting, just book fans in general. The most popular complaint I've been seeing is that if Francesca pursues this queer storyline with Michaela Stirling, Francesca will lose the main conflict of her book, which is her infertility plotline. I have 2 responses to this. She's still married to a man. She literally just married John not 2 episodes ago. She will still experience the same issues that she experienced in the book to do with loss and infertility. Also, this complaint reads a bit weirdly to me because is it fans' impression that Francesca and Michaela can actually be together, because they can't. It's forbidden. They can't marry, they can't have a house together, they can't settle down and have a family together. Practically, they cannot explore that connection. And so she will never get to be with Michaela in that sense. So because she can't be with Michaela, she will still inevitably have to fulfill this traditional public image with a husband and a family, etc. Meaning that even practically, her infertility plotline will remain. She's still going to have to fulfill this public image of herself, you know, having a husband, having a family. So it doesn't really compromise that in any way. Second is the complaint that Francesca was supposed to love John, and according to them, they believe that the show didn't make it out as if she really did love John. I think that fans who have this opinion, they're a bit shaky on the fact that you can love someone, but you don't necessarily have to be in love with them either. There is quite a clear distinction between platonic love and romantic love. They've shown in the show that, yes, Francesca loves John. She feels comfortable with John the way that she doesn't feel comfortable with other people. But there's a spark missing with John that she hasn't found. And not to mention the fact that this is very much the case for surprisingly quite a lot of women who go on to discover they're queer later on in their life. They got married to a man, having a family with them, and then they go on to discover, well, actually, I've met this woman who I'm feeling things for that I've never felt anything for a man in my life. So you have these revelations, I guess. Like, it's completely implausible even in real life. It's not like, oh, they're just plucking that out of nowhere. Like, it's an experience that many women, I think, have experienced. And this isn't to shrug off what she feels for John. In the book, Francesca was literally mourning John's death for years and years and years and years and years after his death. It's really important to make that distinction between what it feels like to love somebody who really gets you and you're comfortable with and you can really be yourself around, versus somebody you're in love with. Now, the third complaint is, why didn't they just create a new character? Why did they have to take Michael and literally just swap it around in such a lazy way? I think that the showrunners are genuinely thinking of making Michaela Francesca's endgame. Michaela is literally Michael in this sense. If they were to create a new character, it would mean that somewhere in the potential Bridgerton universe, the idea, the concept, the character of Michael Stirling is still exists there to be plucked from and added to the show as and when. All of the three complaints that I've discussed so far, I think that they do have a bit of gravity to them. Very plausible questions to have that they just want answered. The next few complaints that I'm going to go over, I think, are a bit more sketchy. They literally just don't want to see a black woman be the romantic love interest for a white, feminine, traditional character. So the next complaint is that Michaela Stirling deviates from the books. The Queen is black. I think that if you're going to use inaccuracies about the book as your main complaint, it just shows how much you really don't get the show. And also, have you watched the show up until this point? Ultimately, this comes down to the nature, I think, of screen adaptations. I think that show Bridgerton was always going to be a different experience from book Bridgerton. And you'd think that audiences would have just known this and accepted this as soon as they saw an interracial marriage being implemented. It shows that the goal of the show is ultimately to showcase diversity. This is quite clear from a message that the author of the Bridgerton books, Julia Quinn, wrote. She basically said that the show is first and foremost dedicated in promoting diversity, which is true. The show is bent on diversity. All the love interests are people of colour, which we have never seen before in any kind of historical drama or adaptation. So it's immediately clear to me and to every single person watching Bridgerton that Bridgerton is not just trying to be another run-of-the-mill historical drama. And this comes down to two things. First, that the showrunners of Bridgerton ultimately want to be a true reflection of today's society. And second, it didn't want to be just like every other TV show in this historical romance genre. If they were to replicate book Bridgerton word for word, line by line, character for character, relationship for relationship, they would have ended up with this and this. In terms of adaptation, it was always clear to me from the beginning that show Bridgerton was never going to be exactly the same as book Bridgerton. Julia Quinn in her message even said that there were now going to be two stories, the story you see in the Bridgerton books and the story you see in the show. If you're so obsessed with what you see in the book, read the books again and again. Write fanfic about it. Something else that Julia Quinn commented about in her message was, with this new take on Francesca's relationship, on Francesca's book, is that it might actually be even more heartbreaking feeling than it was in the book. And this comes on to another one of my points. An LGBT angle on Francesca's story would really ramp up the conflict, the tension in Francesca's character. So she loves John, but really she can be in love with someone else. What makes it worse and what compounds this conflict is that the person she's in love with is the person she's not supposed to be in love with, a woman who she cannot be with and she shouldn't really have these feelings for anyway. Francesca's guilt is therefore twofold. First, she feels guilty for not loving her husband the way that she should, and this is worsened by the fact that what she should be feeling for her husband, she's feeling for somebody who she shouldn't be feeling something for. So now comes on to one of the main parts of my whole video. To say that Michaela is not book accurate is actually just a cover-up, because straight audiences are uncomfortable with the transformation of their heteronormative storylines. It's not that Michael is their favourite book man, it's that they need him to be a man in order to fit in with their own desires. It's that straight audiences are so unimaginative, so incapable of sympathising with other storylines that don't allow them to literally put themselves in the character's shoes. Which, if I may add, is something that queer audiences have had to do for years. Straight storylines that they don't really completely resonate with, but it probes you to think deeper about the characters, what they must be feeling, the conflicts that they're facing. Because while I can't resonate with the attraction towards a man, I can definitely resonate with potentially the pain and the heartbreak that they might be feeling. Ultimately, it's the conflicts and the emotions of the characters that you resonate with, not the genders. This now brings me on to discuss the heteronormativity of the romance genre. These love stories are ultimately created for straight women. Male love interests, therefore, are absolutely essential. These straight female characters, therefore, become the mediums through which straight women can live vicariously. Now, the centrality of a male love interest in the romance genre is also the reason why men loving men representation is much more widely accepted than women loving women representation. And I think that this is a big issue when it comes to queer representation. There's disproportionate representation of men loving men relationships and women loving women relationships. Men loving men relationships, for example, have demonstrated the capacity to be mainstream. Modern day TV shows and films such as Call Me By Your Name, Love Simon, Heartstopper, and I would actually argue that men loving men is a lot more marketable because female audiences dominate the romance genre. And women, whether straight, bisexual, lesbian, all of the above, will consume this men loving men media because the reality is everybody loves this cute, awkward, curly brown haired, skinny white boy who is different, just meaning he plays music or cries every now and then. Seeing a boy or a man who is gay but is still attractive and cute and bashful and relatable is still favoured much more over other types of queer representation like black lesbian women, for example. There's only one acceptable, marketable queer identity. So we've seen now then that straight female audiences can find both heteronormative storylines and gay male storylines entertaining and appealing. Where does this leave women then as love interests? This then creates a romance genre driven by the romanticization of men. So it's clear now that there is a preference for seeing men as romantic love interests over seeing women as romantic love interests. And ultimately, this is what I attribute the backlash towards Michaela to be, fundamentally because women do not resonate with a female love interest. Now I want to offer some of my closing comments for this video. I want to touch a little bit upon the idea that other siblings were set up to be gay or set up to be queer. A lot of people who were complaining about Francesca and Michaela, they offered the alternative that why don't you just give Eloise a queer storyline? Or why don't you just give Benedict a storyline? Because supposedly these characters were set up for them. And ultimately this touches upon the issue of representation and stereotypes about the LGBT community. I think that setting up Francesca with a queer storyline is actually quite clever because it deviates from people's expectations. And let's face it, on the surface, nobody expects the pretty, feminine, traditional white girl to be attracted to women. People only ever want to see queer storylines for side characters. As long as they're a side character and they're not the main character that we really wanted to resonate with, it's okay if they're gay, I don't care. As long as I get my main straight girl character who likes this white man that people have been obsessing over for years. I actually think it's quite impressive that the Bridgerton showrunners have managed to hold off on a queer storyline for this long. You can see that they're kind of testing the waters in season 1, season 2. In season 1 there was that sort of like gay, very, very side character, but the fact that it's now coming into season 3 for one of the main Bridgertons is a really big step of progress. So for now I propose that until Francesca's season comes out or until the next few seasons of Bridgerton come out, let's just sit and enjoy where this might go. Let's just say, straight people, you've been represented for years and years and years since the beginning of time. Every single bit of media is catered towards you, so let us have our moment to shine. Peace.